Hi, I want to talk about a TV series that I've recently become a big fan of, and that is Game of Thrones. Now, Game of Thrones, as you know, is a TV series that's become immensely popular on HBO. There's a number of reasons why I believe the series is popular, why I believe people like it, why I believe people don't like it. So I'm going to share why I think this is, and kind of some of my own opinions on the show and how I feel about it. So first off, I find that if people don't like the series Game of Thrones, there's usually two reasons why they don't like it. Number one, they don't like fantasy. They're just not into it. Number two, they do like fantasy, but they don't like the idea that Game of Thrones is low fantasy. They prefer high fantasy like Lord of the Rings, which, as you know, Lord of the Rings includes all the typical fantasy elements like elves, orcs, goblins, halflings. You know, Game of Thrones, on the other hand, is low fantasy. Doesn't really have a lot of that. You do see dragons, giants. There's the children of the forest. There's the White Walkers. But the White Walkers, for example, as of the end of season 4, we've only seen them on average once per season. And the reason why this is George R. R. Martin is very clever in that he wants to keep a mystique and aura of mystery surrounding the White Walkers. So that's why we haven't seen them a lot. It's very reminiscent of 1950s monster movies where you really wouldn't see the creature a whole lot until the very end of the movie. So I think George R. R. Martin has done very well in kind of doing that sort of thing. Also, in Game of Thrones, it's a lot different than typical fantasy where you don't have sort of a impersonal Dark Lord type figure that has as its primary motive to turn a lush green paradise into a barren wasteland. Game of Thrones, you don't have that. You don't really have good guys and bad guys. I guess you can call the Starks the good guys, maybe call the Lannisters the bad guys. But even so, it's not that cut and dry, and there are some Lannisters that are also kind of good as well. So it really doesn't kind of do that typical good guy, bad guy kind of thing. Characters are very complex. Things are very multi-layered. And, it's a lot different than what you used to have on TV, say back in the 1980s when drama series were kind of simple. It's good guys against bad guys. Maybe there would be an explosion at the end of the episode, but each episode was kind of standalone. It wasn't a sequential, continuing epic that Game of Thrones is. Also, one thing about Game of Thrones is it would be hard to do like a Game of Thrones movie. I know a number of Hollywood execs have approached George R. R. Martin in attempts to try to do a Game of Thrones movie, and it's really difficult to do that. I guess Martin was saying that they wanted to do it about either Jon Snow or Daenerys Stormborn, but you would exclude a lot of other characters, and it would just be too difficult. So I think the show is really perfect being on HBO the way it is. Another thing about it, like I said, is the whole complexity of it. Characters are complex. For example, like Jaime Lannister, it's a very complex character. Kind of starts out being sort of a bad guy, then things happen to him. He ultimately ends up becoming, a bit more of a good guy, and that's really, kind of interesting how Martin has done that. Also, another interesting thing about the whole series is the fact that it's a lot like historical history in a lot of ways. In fact, George R. R. Martin has lifted a lot of certain events from the show straight from history. For example, the Red Wedding comes from the Black Wedding of Scotland, an event that took place in the mid-1400s in Scotland. The idea of having the Lannisters and the Starks have a feud comes from the War of the Roses, where you had a conflict between the Lancaster family and the York family. And I guess this conflict went on for like over 30 years. And another thing that you have is the wall. The idea of the wall comes from Hadrian's Wall in northern England. I guess George R.R. Martin actually went there, actually, saw the wall and thought it would be great to incorporate the wall, into a fantasy series. So I think that's another thing that really strengthens it quite a bit. Quite a few other things about the series that are good. Another thing that I like is the fact that there's no one central plot to the series. As of season 4, there's actually 9 plots going on simultaneously. And I really think that's pretty unique, how, Martin has managed to do that. And it's really a lot of things going on. It could be confusing at first. In fact, when I first got into the series, and it was only about a month and a half ago, although I did watch it when it originally debuted back in 2011, but I initially really got into it, like I said, about a month and a half ago. And it was because I kind of felt the series was boring at first. It just kind of seemed like something that was kind of boring that would be on, say, PBS or something. But then as I began to get into it, I really grew to like the show immensely. And now I think it's one of the best shows on TV. So, that's all I really have to say. There's just a lot to the series, very complex. Season 4 has just ended. I think that was the best season to date. Hopefully Season 5 will be just as good, if not better. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching.